All right, we're live.
Are we live? Okay. Good. Let's start.
Yes.
So, hello, welcome in this masterclass about where we will tell you a bit about plugin development. By the way, also welcome people at home watching this through YouTube Live. So there's a camera. Some of you are also on the camera. So this talk, maybe I should discuss a little bit the scope of the talk itself. I think you all know this is going to be about Leapwing Audio, the company we founded together. We make plugins. We started this 3 years ago, I believe.
Yeah.
2016 or
December 2015.
15 actually. And we learned a lot along the way. We've done a lot, we've learned a lot, and we want to share that with you. We will want to share that just so you get some insights and so on. But also, if there are some of you out there who also have ideas, maybe for plugins or in general software, there could be a few tips that we can highlight here and there. The talk itself will be. I can go here. The talk itself will be based around the chronological story of our company. I personally find that the most interesting because we will start at the beginning and then show you how we added building blocks, how we learned and improved and so on. So this is a bit of an overview of how we will go about. We will tell a little bit about our background, who we are, what we do. If you wouldn't know about the plugins, we'll quickly show them as well in the beginning. And then the majority will be about how do we do this, how did we do this, and how did we come where we are today. So chronologically, as I said. And at the end, some live demos and Pro Tools of the plugins and the Q&A session. If there are some questions along the way, just ask. We can be quite interactive in this talk, so that's no problem.
Yeah, you don't have to wait till the end.
Yeah, just shoot.
Also, for those people on YouTube Live, you can use the chat function. We have Dennis here who will be asking the questions that you ask, and then we can do this live. Cool.
All right, let's go. Who we are?
Yeah, I'll talk a bit about who we are. So my name is Robin. Most of you know me from Abbey Road Institute. I grew up being an assistant with a mastering engineer in Orlando, Florida, with Bob Katz, whom most of you might know. He's a mastering engineer, so I was very fortunate that he became my mentor, the best I could ever dream of. And so I started my career there. Then later on, went back to Belgium, my home country, and I became CTO at a studio called Galaxy Studios in Mol, Belgium. And that's where actually all of us met. So there's 3 of us in total. And at the moment I'm here, I'm director of education at Abbey Road Institute here in Amsterdam, which is most of my students are here. So that's nice. What I do at Leapwing, title is a bit of a vague thing, but we call it product management and marketing / sales. So that includes setting up the website, the backend, actually thinking about products like what could we build, how could we make life easier. So that's a bit of an overview. Then we have Emiliano, who isn't here with us, unfortunately. He's sleeping. He actually lives in LA, so there's about 9 hours earlier. So Emiliano, actually back at the time, he worked at Galaxy Studios as well. He was one of the assistants in the studio. Yeah, that's where we met. Then later on he went to Electric Lady Studios in New York, became Michael Brower's assistant. Then actually after that he became a freelance producer and engineer, and he's currently living in LA. His main role is artist relations and customer support. So if you have problems or you write us on Facebook or Instagram, he's typically the person answering and giving or gathering feedback and contacting engineers, producers, and just kind of he's our voice to the outside world. So that's Emiliano, and then we also have Jeroen.
That's me. So I started out after college at Philips, where I worked as an R&D engineer, audio R&D. I mainly worked on home theater systems there, did pre-development and testing. Then I moved on to Aura Technologies, a company that creates 3D audio technology, and that was actually located in the Galaxy Studios. Actually, one of the owners is the same owner as the Galaxy Studios, Wilfried. So that's where we met in, well, I think it was 2013 or even before.
Yeah, something like that.
I know, and I started 2011.
Okay.
So anyway, there we worked together on some projects because Aura and Galaxy were very closely knit together, especially in the beginning. So yeah, we worked together there already, and then we started this company to build some plugins. Leapwing, I'm doing well what we call operations, and we could call it pre-development, also some testing and so on. So basically everything that has to do with the technology itself and making sure that the products get built and get built right. Beyond us, we also have some other people that work with us. We'll name them. They'll get named in the following slides, but we have some C++ developers, a few people that help us with marketing, with graphics design, and things like that. So, what do we do? What do we do? This was the mission statement from the beginning, I think. We wanted to create mixing and mastering tools. That's what it was all about. We wanted to create tools to make life easier. We want to leverage digital audio, the benefits of digital audio, so no analog emulations. There are a lot of companies that do that very well, but we wanted to do something with all the benefits of digital audio. You can do quite a bit, and we felt that there was still some room for, say, innovation and things to work quite a field. And with an intuitive design, because these tools will be used by mixing and mastering engineers, producers, even in studios. We don't want them to spend too much time learning and using the tool. We just want the tools to work quickly and get good results. That was the original ideas that we started from.
Yes, and then at the moment we have two plugins available. First one is DyneOne, and second one is CenterOne. So I don't know, most of you here have used it in class and have seen me talk about it way too much probably. But let me show you. So this is the first one, DyneOne. It's a multi-band parallel compressor with smart timing controls. And on the left you can see that's the version 1. That was the first version we released back in January 2017. And then about a year and a couple of months later, we came with version 2, which had a lot of new features and a lot of optimizations. And so that's the current state of the plugin, the V2. And so what it does is, or its concept is, that we want to give users the ability to use multiband control, but in a very kind of purist way, because we felt that a lot of multiband compressors out there, they really had a lot of phase inconsistencies between the bands, and that is one of the things we wanted to do. We knew there must have been a possibility to make this happen in digital, so that was what we started to do. Then the second thing is that it has smart timing controls for attack and release times, which is something we're going to talk about and show you in a bit as well. But that's kind of the overview of DyneOne. So it is used mostly, I would say, in mixing and mastering, some in post-production as well. It's very handy. So the way we do it, maybe you want to talk about this part?
So this is just the general steps that happen inside the plugin, inside DyneOne. So this is also where we started all the way in the beginning. When Roman came up with this idea, this was actually the first thing that was put on paper. So how do you build a multi-band parallel compressor? How does that signal chain work? First, you analyze the crest value, and that's something I will go more in detail to later, but that's something specific to DyneOne. The crest value of Crest Factor is peak divided by RMS. It's actually a measure to tell how spiky or smooth a signal is. So if you would have some smooth synthesizers, sounds, that would be low crest value. High crest value would be typically a drum track with a lot of spikes that will give you high crest.
So your difference between the peak levels, the peaks, and your average RMS level, that is the Crest Factor. So that's the.
And why do we do this? Why do we want to analyze that? Well, we want to use it to control the timings in the compressor. This is one of the things we wanted to have built in, so you would, as a user, you would have more of an automatic behavior in the plugin, so it would automatically dial in the correct settings. Again, there's a few slides to really explain this in detail. So that's step one. Then a second step, upsampling the signal, because internally we work with an upsampled signal, gives you a lot more precision and compression. Step three, divided in frequency bands, because it's a multi-band compressor. We want to have different frequency bands to control. And we want to do that without phase issues, so that's why we use linear phase filters. And even more, they are very specifically tuned filters, so they will not cancel out each other, or they won't cause phase issues in the crossover frequencies. Then when you have those 5 bands nicely separated, then you want to apply the compression for each band. Just compression, using that Crest information to set the timings and to make it behave more optimal for every content that you put into it. Then when that happens, you have to downsample again to the original sample rate that you put in. And then the last part, that's the parallel part, there you blend in again the original signal with the compressed, or the compressed with the original, doesn't matter. So those two come together, and that's what actually makes the compressor a parallel compressor. So I think you will show it later in the UI as well, where you can actually blend in every band with a fader. So that's the parallel blend or parallel compression that happens there. Mm-hmm. So that's a rough overview of DyneOne.
Cool. So then the second plugin we have is CenterOne. Again, on the left, the version that we first released, also in January 2017, and then V2, which came also about a year and a bit. I think June.
Yeah, year and a half.
Yeah, June this year. Yeah. We released V2 with some added features such as center channel width and some UI optimization, so it made more sense, and presets and a lot of different things actually.
More plugin thingies and features. Yeah,
more like structural. So actually, the way that CenterOne works is you have 2 algorithms, or 2 parts of the algorithm. The one on the left, where you see the block, which says center prominence and level trim. So that's one side, and then the other side is the other one. So on the left side, center prominence, it's a control that allows you to when you have a stereo signal, you would typically have, let's say, oh yeah, it's in the next slide. There we go. So center prominence actually allows you to bring forward your phantom center like this, or move it back out, so you can push it forward or backward without changing any of the panning information. So if you have an orchestral recording and you have violin, viola, cello, everything has its position. Whenever you change the level of the center, you don't want musicians to shift in their space. So for that, center prominence actually allows you to bring everything gradually forward and backwards. So that's the left side of the algorithm. And on the right side, you have center extraction, which actually separates your left, center, or your left and right signal, into a dedicated left, center, and right. And then you can do manual manipulation of each of these channels, I guess.
Yeah, it's basically your virtual channels, or the phantom channel that you extract, basically. And a lot of people compared it to MS. I think that's also how we started. We wanted to have like the next step of MS, a better way of doing MS. This is not MS, just to be clear. So MS, called for mid-side processing, you'll have some issues there. Your mid signal is still the sum of left and right together. So this separating of your viola and all your orchestra instruments, that would not be completely possible with MS. You would not have individual controls about the actual panorama.
There was a really great YouTube video. When was it? 2 weeks ago? Something like that?
Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Andreas from Berlin. So I'm sorry, the video will be in German.
Yeah.
I try to explain the difference between MS and the CenterOne, and it took me almost 2 hours because it was a live stream like this, and people were always questioning, but I can do this in MS. No, you can't. So what I always say is, if you put a signal to the left channel, like a sine tone, and you extract it, it will be on the left channel all the way, all the time. In MS, you will have it on the M channel, which is mono, and on the S channel, which will be the difference. That's what I think is the better way. Mono and difference.
Exactly.
English say. So you will have this signal all the time, but here you don't only have it on the left channel. The extraction. That's way better.
Thank you.
Thanks. How we do it?
Yeah.
That's one for me.
Yes.
Sorry?
Sorry? Way better. I like it.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Like said in the beginning, the scope of this talk is to show you what we learn and to share that a little bit, like how does a plugin company come about and what things are just involved. We put it all, or part of it I guess, on one slide. The audio is low.
Okay, well.
Okay. A bit louder and closer?
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
the mic. Yeah.
There's the mic. So.
Okay.
A bit louder.
Bit louder. So we have we started actually with the left part, research and development. That's where an idea starts. So when we started talking about building a compressor, that's typically where you put focus on. So you start making prototypes, you start figuring out how do you do this technically. But quite quickly already, we actually saw that all these other things would get involved, because we decided it's one thing to build a tool for ourselves, but because we felt this was an idea that could be useful for everyone, basically, we early on decided to go and distribute it and go and sell it through a web store and so on. So that's where everything else came in play. Things like copy protection, user experience, because it had to be nicely working for everyone, not just us who knew what each button would do. Artist relations connected to marketing and sales, because you want to spread the word, and how do you do that? So those were some questions that came up. Nice graphics. You do want to make it look professional, and yeah, so it looks pleasing. A bit later, when you come close to release, you have to think about support as well, because there will always be some challenges, issues, and stuff coming back from people who use it. And then creating a brand, again, spreading that word. And then there's also some legal stuff involved. You have to make sure that everything is okay, what you're doing, that all the NDAs and contracts are in place. Online store, I mentioned it in the website. That's all Robin stuff. So what we're going to do for the rest of the talk is just take you from the day we started and then show where all the bricks got added and optimized, because that's what we still do.
Yeah.
Your idea.
So, well, in fall 2015, at the time we were all working at Galaxy. And so, yes, the idea actually was just on a plane, where because on a plane you have a lot of time and then you just start drawing out ideas. And it actually came back from, well, many years before, when I worked in a mastering studio, and you could see that, there's a lot of tools, like you have a DC6000, you have a Wise, and all these tools that actually, especially at the time, I couldn't afford myself, and I still wanted to use high quality plugins. And at the time, I found it very hard to find something that I would be satisfied using for my own productions. So then came the idea of, like, what would be a tool that would be very useful for me personally. Started to write it out. Multi-band, but no phase shifts. Have more like timing control things, which actually was more developed later. So it was just like very rough ideas. And then when I came back to Belgium, I went to talk to Jeroen and say, hey, maybe we could do this.
Yep.
And then
it was still just like a weekend project. That's how it started out, basically.
For a while, actually.
For a while, yeah.
For quite a while.
Yeah. So let's just make a tool, like a prototype that we could use, and that's how it all started. We didn't have an idea or plan for a company from the first day.
So you first made it for yourself?
Yeah, I think that's that eventually that was. Yeah.
I think it goes for all the plugins that we make and are making. It's for for you and Amy then mostly because you use it in real life.
Mhm.
But that's always the starting point.
Yeah.
What do we want? How do we want to use it? What do we miss in our workflow? And
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think that's what it's about. It's like, I mean, you know best what you miss in the workflow, and then you come to think of like, maybe there is a way to do this because it doesn't exist yet, and so then you just start brainstorming and a lot of back and forth because then we talk about it, and then you will send something and we say listen to it, so, maybe we're going somewhere, but and then go through a lot of iterations, and then eventually there's like, damn, this is nice, and then hopefully. That's
takes a while, by the way, until you get to that point.
How long?
In case of DyneOne, we started in fall 2015, and it got released in January of 2017, so over a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can clarify that. I didn't write the code of the plugins. So what my job is, I do more the even louder. Do more the pre-development part, what I like to call it. I work in MATLAB. I do write code, but it's not the code that actually comes into the plugin. So I do all the research code, making prototypes, all bits and pieces, basically making the blueprint of the plugin. And then we have some very good C++ developers who are very good at optimizing that code and putting it into a small package that the plugin is, because you have to optimize for CPU and so on. And that's not my specialty. We have Clément, François, and Thomas. We'll name them later. They all joined in over the years. They help us with that. So we do have other people working on the actual plugin code. But always, and I test it then again. So it's a collaboration, but there's somewhat of a line in between.
And they are in the company or they're freelancers?
They're all freelancers. Yeah, that's maybe that's a good question. As a small company, we talked about that actually a few times. At some point you have to decide, like, do we grow and actually get an office space with employees and so on. Since we all still had at that point a full-time day job, that was not viable. So we first would have to take that step ourselves. So we kept working with freelancers. It's more flexible. Plus, the talent in the audio software industry is located all over the world, and it's pretty sparse. So it's not easy to find a whole team of people in one spot. So still up until now, we decided to keep using that model. So we're all over Europe in this case. So I'm in Belgium. Robin is here in Amsterdam. Not Europe. Amy is in LA.
I was thinking,
Emiliano is now in the States. In France, some developers. We work with someone in Germany, another one in Belgium. So we work over Skype. That's our office basically. So yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
How did you find these developers? Were they friends you know from before? Or?
Yeah,
we had worked with them before, and
that's how this always starts. It's like Robin started with an idea. He was like, who could I get involved? And then he knew me, so we started talking, started making prototypes. Then I knew a C++ developer who could help us with the rest, and that's how it all started. All weekend work in the beginning and after hours still.
And late nights.
And very long nights, like 3, 4 a.m., especially when release came close. It's always someone we knew, friends, and so on.
I think that's still the best way. Is like if you have good, because and especially with C++ developers, because I think it's not just finding a C++ developer, but somebody with audio experience, and especially in this way, because I mean you have so many different DAWs. We'll talk about that later, and every DAW has their own kind of ways of working, and you have to. So ideally, if you can work with somebody who has done this before, they already know where to look for and can much more easily come through it than that you have to reinvent the wheel in that case.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What came after fall?
January.
Here a bit of what we already said. So we founded the company. So we had a legal structure to base everything on, to base the distribution and so on. Start making the prototypes, diagram designs. So that's the first thing you want to do when you're building something. You want to like subdivide it in separate problems that you can solve. So and making a diagram for that. we started with the one of the main parts, the crossover filters.
Maybe that's a good thing, because I think anything you want to build, it all comes down to small issues or things that you have to solve. So if you list them all and then you just start tackling them, and that's in the end, then you just glue it all together.
Because
Well, not just,
it quickly grows into a complex blob. It looks like a simple small plugin, but what happens behind this can get complex quite quickly, and so you want to keep track of it and get an overview. The first thing are the crossover filters. I think that was the next slide. Yeah. So those special filters, we worked on that quite a while to get them right. And at that point, Clément also joined. So he was one of the freelance guys who helped us with DyneOne, with the first version. Yes.
What language did you write that?
Well, the actual full prototype that would be called a DyneOne with an input and an output, that was already C++. I had all the steps before I've done that in MATLAB. So the separate crossover testing, the Crest calculation stuff. So all those building blocks I did in MATLAB.
Oh, MATLAB is a program.
Yeah, it's also programming language basically. Yeah, but it's one that I know, and it works a bit easier as being an audio R&D engineer. You have it's quicker to make something that generates a sine wave that outputs something. Can all be done in C++ too, but that was just not my specialty, so that's why I work in MATLAB mostly.
And I think the reason why, because nowadays when we do testing, he would actually export oftentimes in VST from MATLAB, but the first version we had with DyneOne with the filters, like, we couldn't even run it in real time. Like to process 1 minute of audio, we needed 5 minutes. So and we've come a long way. DyneOne is still quite heavy, but if we started from one minute of music, took 5 minutes to render full CPU. So yeah, that was tricky.
That was difficult. So the crossover filters that we talked about a few times already. Here you see them. It's on quite a big scale. They go from 0 to minus 170 dB. You have the noise floor. These are 5 crossover bands, 5 filter bands, and with 4 crossover frequencies. And as we already said in the beginning, the main let's call it issue of multiband compressors is that they will have phase incoherencies at the crossover frequencies. Even if you use linear phase filters, they can still interfere with each other at those crossover points. So what we have built here, or what we used here, is tuned filters that cancel out each other. So if you sum them all together, that's the main point. If you sum those 5 filter bands back together, then you get a complete unity gain output signal. So there's no difference between in and output. There are no phase issues. It's completely reconstructible.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yep. Then in.
Oh yeah, that was the offline.
Oh yeah, so that February 2016. I still quite early on. So that's the offline rendering in MATLAB. So as we said before, then Jeroen could actually take a file, export low frequency band, and then we could bring them in Pro Tools, listen together, seeing okay, and then like put individual compressors on them, like figuring out, are we actually somewhere or are we just making crap? So
and you want to do it that way to also save time. You don't want to start in C++ like we have this whole idea, let's just try it, to then find out that it wouldn't work. So you want to start with small steps, small iterations. First test the filters themselves, then add some compression. Try to do it the quickest way possible, in my case in MATLAB, because I was familiar with it. That's also a good tip for anyone who wants to build anything, basically. Start with small steps, small increments. Don't go for the full product immediately, because that could be a waste of time in the end. So.
But it's kind of like do and don't, because in the end we're going to talk about as well about testing and having tools in place that whenever you render something, it checks that everything is working. So you do need to put the whole system in place, ideally sooner rather than later.
True.
But also, I think the point is, like, you want to make sure that you're going somewhere, and you don't want to go through a year of development or half a year, whatever it is, and then figuring out like, well, this actually doesn't even sound good, so what am I doing here? So that it really helps to split that up in pieces. Yeah.
About those filters, did you
Well, we worked with somebody, and it was a lot of back and forth of like listening, seeing what we could do. So yeah, it was like a lot of back and forth. It wasn't just like you could get them from the internet.
Now you have an idea from the picture you just showed us?
Yes.
Five bands,
Yeah.
And then you develop.
Yeah. So also thinking about what are the frequencies we want, and how can we make sure that they all are tuned so they can all filter some each other.
The hardware doesn't have that phase differentiation.
Hardware analog? No, analog definitely has phase shifts. So yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the goals with starting Leapwing, trying to figure out how can we use digital technology and especially CPU power that is now you can use a lot to do something that you couldn't do before that wasn't or isn't possible. And yeah, analog is great with a lot of things, but there's also and yeah, I think we're trying to go away from trying to mimic what has already been done in analog and seeing if we can do something else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then the plugin development started, so that was with Clément. So in February it actually started the work of the first full prototype. I promised I would tell a bit more about Crest Factor when I give the overview of DyneOne. So let's do that now. We start by talking a bit about compression and how you would use a compressor. What you see here is just some waveforms of typical random audio. On the left, it's quite a smooth signal. On the right, obviously a drum track with very hard spikes, transients. In the middle, combination of both. So maybe Rom, you can talk about compression usage.
Yeah, so in most cases, the way I would personally do compression, it would be different when I would compress. Well, it depends obviously how it sounds because you tweak a compressor based on how it sounds and what you want. But in most cases, I would tweak it differently, especially attack and release times, which make up a big part of the sound of a compressor and the vibe that you get. So I would do, let's say, the smooth sound, however you call it, differently than I would do the more transient, spiky sounds. So that was one of the ideas. Can we come up with something that where, we come up with like a smarter way to make that decision for you so that you can set a range and then the algorithm would take part of the rest and would say, okay, now it's more spiky, so I'm going to go for this value. And so that's where we came to Crest of being the main indicator of the algorithm telling us what to do.
So maybe I'm repeating, but the Crest factor is peak divided by RMS. So that gives you a value, and you will get a low value for smooth sounds and a high value for transients. So yeah, typically drum sounds, things like that. So we wanted to use that parameter, if you will, that characteristic of audio to steer the smart timing controls. You'll see them here.
You can see here in Pro Tools where you have DyneOne, and then if you go to one of the bands, there you have a minimum attack time, maximum attack time, minimum release time, and maximum release time. So that's what we're talking about. So the crest value kind of decides where the actual compression is going to happen between those two values. If you decide to move them all together, then you would still have like a normal compressor. You would just have a single attack and single release. So you can still use it as a regular compressor, but you can also use the smart side of it by setting up a range between them.
And this is a continuous process, so the actual attack and release will basically swing between these range values. So show this one. Then connecting it a bit to what happens inside. So this diagram shows you on the x-axis the crest value. So left is low crest, so the smooth sounds are on the left. On the right, you'll get peaky sounds. And then when you have smooth sounds, you want to use the maximum attack and release settings. And when you have high crest, transients and so on, you want to use a quicker attack and release. And anything in between. So the algorithm itself figures out where to place the attack, and that gives also the I would call it the organic sound or the musical sound of DyneOne's compressor. That comes from this this idea, this mechanism. Yeah, like I said, spiky will go to the max, to the minimum, and smooth to the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one thing to have an idea, build a tool, build a prototype. Robin uses mostly Pro Tools, so an AEX plugin would have been just fine. But we also wanted to share this with the whole world, and the whole world is quite diverse, and they use Mac, they use Windows, AEX, VST, VST3, audio units. So that's kind of a challenge to make a plugin or make all those versions of the plugin. For that we use Juice, which is a nice framework. It actually allows you to make one main code and then distribute that or build it for all those different platforms. Works quite nicely, and yeah, we took a decision early on to go for that. That makes our lives easier. We don't need to do all the work again for all those platforms. Then two other things. If you decide to develop something for Mac, you have to sign up for the developer program. So if anyone wants to do that,
Louder.
even louder, the compression.
You got that.
Yeah, you need to sign up for a developer program. Avid wants you to sign up for the AEX developer program. So there's some legal stuff to take care of and keep in mind as well.
Yeah. And also just to point out, because yes, you have a main framework like Juice that you use to build code, but you still have to, well, create part of it differently for Mac and for Windows. So you would still have two things to control and to update. So yes, the main processing code you could share, but there's still it's not as easy as writing once and clicking
A question.
build. Yes.
If you sign up for the developer programs of Apple and Avid, do they also take cut of the sales, or it's not like that?
No,
not for this.
Apple is a yearly fee. I think it's $99 a year.
Yeah.
And you just have to prove that you're a company, so you have to send your statuten, your company details. And for Avid, you have to contact them. You have to sign an NDA, and that's the process.
This way, you are legally allowed to release an AAX plugin.
Well, to build an AEX plugin, you actually need this. You couldn't create it. You couldn't build an AEX plugin without the
software.
Yeah, you need to get a piece of software from Avid, the SDK. They send it to you only after you signed up for this.
I understand.
So everyone who builds AEX plugins has an agreement with Avid. Some more background details about software company. The moment you start growing, more people working on it, especially because we're distributed geographically. Not only for that, but you want to keep your source code nice and tight and nice and clean. So you need.
How many of you are familiar with Git?
Oh yeah.
You are.
Yeah. So I'll
okay.
Just background software engineering knowledge. You want to use a system to keep track of all your software, because if different people are creating software and you have to combine them, it can quickly become quite messy.
Conflicts.
Conflicts. Maybe it used to be some people used to send code with zip files to each other and then combine and all that. You don't want to use that in a production environment. So Git is one of the tools that we use to just keep everything clean.
And that's how you can have, if you have let's say one file and you want one developer to work on a section of the file, another one on another section. Like if you don't use that, you have to then later they send it to you both, and then you have to copy this from this and this from this, and this just merges them together. And allows you to have multiple people working on different parts of the code without the problems that you have to send files around. And there's an update, I have to send it to this person as well because he's already working on something else, but he doesn't have the latest version. It's going to be a mess if you don't have good control.
The message is if you build any software whatsoever, please do use version control. Like, that has to be there. Remember that one.
Yes. So that was the first design of DyneOne, the first build. Super ugly, gray background. This was very rudimentary, and that was actually also the moment where we said maybe we should get a designer. So that kind of was the story. But at least we were happy. We had control over the bands. We didn't yet have all the attack and release controls that came later.
Well, they
in the
were
builds.
in there,
Yeah.
but under the hood.
Yeah.
So here you see like the 7 main faders and hard soft control was still back then. But under the hood, there was like a few dozen of parameters that we could control through another mechanism. So no nice sliders yet, but just to test out like which parameter do we want to expose to a user. So we built this to try out all those things and then take the next step. And
that's actually a very tricky part of it, because checking all those individual parameters, which could be like you have minimum attack, for example, and you need to set a range, like what's the minimum attack that you can set of the minimum attack, so between how many milliseconds and how many milliseconds, and you want to, in development, you want to play with it, like what's the longest you want to set it, what's the shortest, and so all those become extra parameters. So even just having one parameter turns into having 4 or 5, and then you need to make decisions at certain. It's like mixing. You need to take a decision at some point where you're gonna place an instrument or what to do with it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I have one more question then.
Mhm.
Go.
In this phase, because this was like the first functional version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have like a close user group for this, or was it just you?
Not yet.
3
No.
guys working with a plugin.
Yeah, just us at that point.
Yeah, at that
I think
point we
was
didn't do it.
the beta came later. That was
Yeah.
the first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, beta is like 6 months later, I think.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so
much
the
later.
beta release, you got users to sign up, and
Yeah.
you send it to friends and like
Yeah.
users,
We'll-
give you feedback.
We'll talk about that in a second,
Yeah.
because we actually did an event in LA to get people like engineers there to get them sign up to become like a private user group.
Oh yeah.
So
Okay, cool.
The second plugin. You want to tell this one?
sure. So in June 2016, we actually went to the AES in Paris, where we saw a presentation of François Becker about a stereo rebalancing algorithm, which was like a pan law changer. It was that was the idea. So at that point, we kind of saw it was like, hey, this could be interesting. We went to have drinks afterwards in the cafeteria, so nothing fancy. So we started talking about the idea, and from that actually came pretty quickly. Well, the same day, I think.
Yeah.
We kind of said, okay, let's do this together. So then Francois joined Leapwing to develop this, and that's where the idea of CenterOne kind of got developed and got started. So this was quite a lot later. This was about 6 months later. So our first idea was just to DyneOne, because that was the first thing that came up. And then actually the first plugin to be released was CenterOne. It kind of got quicker than DyneOne. But that's the...
was like a surprise to us as well, actually. And but yeah, we had this opportunity to build this, so suddenly we were making 2 plugins while we didn't even release DyneOne together. So that was quite tricky. Concurrent development. So then we start adding a question.
Roughly, CenterOne is a smaller piece of work.
It's only because François already did like the research part, so it's not included in where he started. It's not included in this presentation, but it's basically his idea that we adapted a bit and combined with some things and made into a plugin. So that made that we could go quicker to production with CenterOne.
And also the fact that we could do concurrent development, so parts of the global code that we could use for both, we could kind of develop at the same time. So that kind of helped make that faster. And also I think testing in CenterOne's case was a lot quicker, because that we're going to talk about in a bit, but testing for DyneOne and optimizing, it took more than 6 months, because it was a very heavy plugin. So we kept seeing how can we optimize CPU and do a lot of stuff and play with different buffers. And with CenterOne, this was a lot quicker. We didn't really have too many issues. So that's the reason why then we released CenterOne first. But I wouldn't say it's much simpler, but that's a bit of difference.
Yeah. So here another building block was added, some project management. Again, because we're all separated, we don't have one office. We need to stay in touch and keep track of all those things that we're working on. So we introduced Kanban. It's like a low lightweight project management tool. Same period, we also started optimizing the graphics, made a new logo. Michiel and Martin.
Yeah. So then we
joined.
had Michiel and Martin, who are with Backpack. They're actually in the building now. They joined us for marketing and graphics and design. So that was, yeah, as we said before, we had the gray version, and then we said, oh, let's have a good designer. And we knew Martin; he's a really great designer, and then he decided to join us as well.
And then licensing, because copy protection, you don't want to get your plugin stolen or hacked. So we started thinking about that as well. We'll come back to these points now. I think, yeah, here's just a quick example of Kanban. Not only applicable for software engineering, but for anywhere basically where people work together. So you make a list of stories or tasks that need to be worked on, and then you keep track of who's working on which task until it's all done. And so ideally, you start off with all the items in the left column, and then they start moving until they're all done and in production and released. Again, we try to keep it low weight. There are some, like in bigger companies, you'll find other project management methods, but Kanban is lightweight, and yeah, we like to keep it low overhead as possible.
And do you use a specific tool for the Kanban implementation?
Yeah, we use Jira for
Okay.
relation.
Yeah.
Jira.
Yeah.
Lesson.
It works.
That's
Yeah.
right.
It's great.
Yeah, these are the first graphics that, or the new graphics that were designed by Martin.
Yeah.
Also the new logo. Yeah, and that's where it started looking more and more like an end product. We chose the color schemes for the plugins.
Mm-hmm.
The blue, the Leapwing blue color, also on the website, and all that blue comes back. So, and you started on a marketing plan with.
Yeah. So that was, I guess, August, September, something like that. So then we started thinking, because then we knew we had plugins coming, because we already had beta or like intro, maybe an alpha. So then we were thinking, okay, we need to beta, we need to find people, artists that would like this, or engineers and producers. We need to think about press releases and reviews for magazines, so contacting all the magazines. We need to set up Google AdWords, so that when people search for multi-band compressor, mastering plugin, whatever, that they would find us. Facebook advertising as well. Looking at, okay, how are we gonna do this? What are the people we're gonna look for? Target groups. And then, yeah, well, having Google Analytics already, having the website ready to go, and starting to look for video tutorials, how to actually explain to users what the plugins do and what needs to be done. So that's quite a list that you need to prepare before you actually go live. And yeah, that we did late summer 2016. Yeah.
And it's something that's continuously being improved and added upon. We learn, we change things. So that's never ending.
No.
Like, it's not that you make one plan and you stick with it for a whole year or 2 years. You kind of modify and yeah, learn as you go.
Yeah. Cool. Any questions there? No?
Or online maybe, nothing.
Sure.
Okay, we can do that in the demo, I think.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, the licensing system, I think we
talked about it. We needed copy protection. There are a few options out there. In the end, we chose to make our own licensing system to have more control about that part of the plugin.
But what were the options in the beginning?
Well, most known as iLock, I think.
Oh yeah.
But at the time we decided we didn't want to have a hardware dongle based system, so we decided to do something ourselves. And we had the possibility to develop that, so we did that.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you use like open source components for this, or just built from scratch?
Built from scratch.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's dangerous to do, to take a copy protection copy from somewhere online, because that would be the first place a hacker would look probably. No, that's. I think the key is to find something that you can't easily predict. But it's a tricky one. So yeah, then the first AES LA, which was January,
October, I think.
So October, yeah, correct.
October 2016.
Yeah, So then in LA there was a party, and we actually did the party.
We made these banners.
And we made these banners, but
Yeah.
to be honest, it wasn't that great because everybody was drinking, having fun, and the banners were there, but it like made no sense. The good side was we did get to talk to some cool engineers there, and that were interested, but we could have done that without the party probably. Well, it was still a party happening anyway. So. But anyway, at the time you try to come up with ideas and you try it, and then you say, okay, this didn't work, we don't do this again, but well, we'll still do parties, but different ones. Right?
Without the banner.
Yeah. Yeah.
About the protection, is the demo the same as the actual product?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that actually changed as well. In the beginning, it wasn't. So then we made two separate installers. And one, well, we actually did the classic one where you get a beep every 30 seconds or a minute or whatever it was, which is super annoying. But it's the best way to protect. I mean, that's a foolproof way, but then you have to decide, like, do you want to be annoying, but fully protected, or...
We spoke about it, but having a 60-day full use program usually gets people to use the product and very, very difficult to miss it.
Yeah.
There are no limitations.
No, now there are no limitations. We do 30 days, yeah. Some companies do 14 days, some 20, some 30. We decided to do 30. Yeah, I'm sure it's nicer to do more. Yeah, it's yeah, that's true. It's but yeah, I mean, somewhere you have to draw the line because then people say I want 90 days. So it's
I think the best way to do is running time, like TC is doing it.
What do you mean?
The running time of the plugin.
Right.
Actual
Okay.
usage.
Well, most of the time I get things to test out, and well, then there's jobs to do, and you
Yeah.
never do jobs with demo versions.
No, that's true.
And then maybe 14 days later, I think about, oh well, I downloaded this and tried it, and it's all over.
Yeah. We find this because from a copy protection, that's very hard to do. So it'll be very interesting to see how they did it. Because if you have to store a file locally that keeps track of how many minutes it's used. So if a hacker finds a way to reset that every now and then, so. But I understand your point.
Hackers in the audio industry anymore.
I hope
all
so.
gone.
I hope so. I truly hope so. But it's a good point. And
I
yes.
have a question. Can you talk about the algorithm, well, as much as you can, for your protection? What it does? It doesn't connect to the internet, that it checks licenses.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and when there is no internet, what it does?
Then it doesn't work. No. We are working on a way to release an offline version. We already have a way of doing that, but I mean, we've done it with a few people, so it's mostly like an experimental stage. But we do want to bring that. But yeah, the hardest thing is figuring out what's the best way to do it and really nailing that.
Be connected to the internet to launch.
That's the standard authorization. Yeah, yeah, that's every fifth you have to be online. So what it does is you connect to the internet, you get your serial number is correct, it gives back saying, okay, you're good. Then it's gonna, after 8 days, it's gonna try, every time you launch the plugin, it's gonna try to connect to the internet, see if you still have an active license.
So during 8 days, you don't need internet.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So then after 8 days, it's gonna try to connect, but even if it doesn't, it will still work until I think it's 15 days. And then you have to be, so within 8 days and 15 days, you have to be connected once to the internet while using the plugin. For us, that was the most user-friendly way of doing it without, making it very complicated and doing a key and yeah. So, but
how do you manage, like a hacker can then find out which data is so because I guess when you connect to the internet, it checks the date is today. So then after a few days, it checks always the date.
No, but it doesn't use the computer day because it checks with the server.
But when there is no internet, where does it check which date it is?
That's yeah. I mean, to be honest, I think there's always a way for. I mean, there's always ways for anything to be hacked. I think that's. I mean, iLock has even been hacked multiple times, so we try to make it as difficult as we can. But yeah, in the end.
Yeah, I'm telling you because I'm facing this problem now.
Yeah, no, I know it. I mean, it's a tricky problem because yes, you can make it very hard and also like offline authentication and check multiple settings like which hard drive is in the computer CPU. But then if you change a hard drive, it doesn't work anymore. So yes, you can go very protective, but then every user is going to complain because it's going to be a nightmare, which, yeah, then you have that problem. So is where do you are between that extreme and figuring out something that works best. But in the end, I don't think there's any right way. It's like, yeah, either you're too protective or you're too open. So, but yeah, that's it's a tricky.
Discuss this one.
Yep.
Then we took the feedback from the beta testers. I think a handful of people in the end helped us. Now we took that, was very valuable. Always very good to do a beta run. Then you see things, or other people see things that you haven't seen yourself. Have different setups, different systems, and so on. So then a period started of stabilizing what we already had. So it started looking quite final, but then you start to make it ready for an actual release. The designs got still a bit fine-tuned, and I think you started working on late nights on the web store and site. So
I have one more question with feedback. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
But did you formalize the way you received feedback? Did you have like a feedback button or a form or?
It's a good question. We didn't. So I think we talked about it, like should we make a paper to fill in and all, but we wanted to keep it as low threshold as possible, so that people they would just write us mails and
Or Facebook message. I mean,
or
anything.
Facebook yeah.
Anything.
So we like to stay there to just keep it open. So we, in the case of, are you talking about the beta plugin or just in general?
No, in this case, in this phase,
Yeah.
but in general also.
Yeah, kind of the same. So we appreciate, by the way, all feedback that comes to us. We have very long mails that we can have, like with a lot of quite specific feature requests, things that we didn't think about. Sometimes there are things that we did already think about and we know are not possible, so we'll also reply accordingly. Sometimes it's just like a one-liner, hey, it's not working on this system, that's the characteristics, blah, blah, blah. This DAW is not working for that buffer setting. Typically those kind of things happened at that time. So there's a way you could formalize it, but until now I don't think we really needed it.
Because you send an email with the installer, and then they reply to the email saying, "Oh, this works and this doesn't," and then you just keep yourself. I mean, it's not like it's hundreds of users.
Okay, because for instance, with Ableton, after an Ableton crash, a file is generated.
Yeah, crash file.
Which contains like system information and stuff like that.
Also something we discussed and thought about a logging file, but I'm not going to go too deep, but there are a few technical catches. So yes, you can generate a file with technical data about a system, but in the cases when a plugin crashes, you need like more detailed info about how it crashed, why, and so on, and that information is not always available unless you would have a complete separate system that logs all that, but that causes CPU, and then you have
because
again.
A plugin doesn't have all the undergrounding access that a host has, because a host has access to the computer, to everything. But as a plugin, you only have very specific control over something.
Yeah. It's quite tricky sometimes to those. There are quite a few bugs that we worked on for days, if not weeks, just to be able to reproduce them, because we couldn't figure out. For us it was working, for someone else it didn't, and then it's figuring out why. And in the end, when it was just that one little and then it's fixed. But until you get there, it's always also iterative. So that answers your question. Cool. This is connected to that. So you have that many DAWs. They all work different in their own way. Which we found out quite quickly. DyneOne is a heavy plugin. It uses a lot of CPU resources, and in Reaper, for example, that worked fine. Very low overhead, low CPU. Studio One, it wouldn't work at all. Wow. So, and that had to do with buffer management, the way that the DAW sends buffers to a plugin. We learned along the way as well. So. They all do it differently. That's also a tip, like if you want to distribute a plugin, go and test or look for beta testers, because there will be very strange issues on all those different hosts.
I mean, if you think about how many DAWs there are, it's incredible. Like in mastering, there's more, and then you have the mixing DAWs, and I mean, you have so many out there, and then also all of them on Windows 8, Windows 10, maybe Windows 7, on Mac, on all the different versions. So there's so many variables, even different sound cards. Like, with this sound card it had a problem. fuck, you know.
It did?
Yeah.
Yeah. And even
You have to buy the sound card to be able to test it.
Wow.
in one particular instance, it was even the CPU, that a certain type of CPU would do a calculation differently inside DyneOne, with a very small difference, but that small difference built up and in the end caused quite a distortion in DyneOne. So just to say, like, who would have thought that working on a different CPU would give you an issue in a plugin? But yeah.
But this
So good.
juice platform would, I expect it to mitigate these
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah, partially, but not all. So
Yeah, no, it's just
Yeah.
your laugh thing, but again, so did we.
Well, so did we in the beginning, but yeah, it's
no,
you
it's
can't.
not like that. You
Yeah.
can't foresee everything. But, so yeah, we learned a lot, to say the least. And then time was there for the release on all the platforms. And of course, after that, we just kept going. Once it's out in the field.
So now we're speeding up the timeline a bit.
Yeah.
We're going a bit
Yeah.
faster.
So we'll just wrap it all in 2017. That's when it became a blur as well, I believe, for me. So it was just iterations, error reports, user feedback, plugin updates, further building the marketing, the branding, making videos. That's what happened then. You worked also on endorsements, so getting more artists behind Leapwing to spread the word. We signed up, or we had contact with press, magazines, and so on to get reviews. And that was all for the existing products, but we started thinking about a V2 for both, actually, in the end, both the plugins, based on all the feedback that we got. So we did get some very nice ideas and tips and questions from the field, and we tried to make that into what is now called V2, DyneOne V2 and CenterOne V2. They got released mid-2018.
Mhm.
Before that guy there, Dennis Benches, joined. Dennis helps us on social media. It's really nice to have some extra people to like just be able to split the tasks a bit, because the more you grow as a company, the more stuff needs to be done.
Especially things like social media. It's very important to do it consistently. Yeah. But once you're working on a feature, then you don't want to bother about like, oh, I have to take this selfie or, or whatever. And with Dennis is nice because he keeps pushing. Hey, send us something with that, and then you just send everything to Dennis, and he filters. He say, yeah, that we post, that we don't post. So that's nice.
And also Thomas joined mid 2018, so an extra C++ developer. And then a few words, that third line, build server. I won't go too much in detail. Build server setup testing and what we call Parkar now. Build server is there for software engineering. Basically, it's something that every change that you make to your code base gets built immediately. So you're not going to wait until the end of the week or just before release to build all the software again. It will do that automatically for you. And if I can give one golden tip to anyone starting software, do this as early on as possible, if not from day one. I didn't do it because I didn't have the knowledge when we started. But this saves you so much time in testing and figuring out if there are bugs in the code and so on. So big tip, like invest some time and learn about the proper setup of your software.
Because as an example, like if you are writing code and let's say you have version 1 which you send to everybody, and then whenever you do updates, you want to make sure that you don't change any of the audio quality or anything changes the next release. And if you think about DyneOne, there's a lot of controls to check. So you want to make sure that if you make a new build, that the output audio is still the same, or at least if it's a difference, that it is what you're trying to do. So ideally you want a setup that actually creates the new file, the new plugin, VST or whatever, and then it creates, or it automatically creates audio files with different settings. So you give it different parameters, and it compares the audio between the version before, so it could tell you whether it's a null, which means it's exactly the same as you have before. Because if you have to test this manually, there is going to be an error at some point.
Very well explained. And we have that now. We developed that internally. We call it Parkar, plugin audio quality and regression testing. It had to have a name.
Super geeky.
Yeah. And by the way, we are thinking about open sourcing this for other developers because we feel like it's so valuable for us, and it doesn't. We will not sell this as a product anyway. So we feel like this could be is a good candidate for open sourcing. Then other people can also join in and help building it further and optimizing that way.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
I think also for like if you're a young developer and you have an idea, I mean, if you have to do all of this, then you have no more time to build the actual plugin. So yeah, like if we can give these tools to people and then you can just do your thing. Yeah.
Sometimes a spin-off of an idea brings much more sales than the actual idea itself.
Yeah.
So basically, if all the software developers, plugin developers, could use Packard, then it could be a much larger product than
maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
We had, I think we had a discussion, and at least my assessment was there are probably not enough audio developers in the world to make this like really profitable.
Well, and also for us, I think we're a small team and we want to keep focus. And our focus is building plugins.
We would have to make support for this product then, and then really build that up.
We prefer making time into developing new plugins than.
But the thing of spin-off or a simple combination of ideas that suddenly hits this.
Yeah, that can work. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a fair point.
Could be.
There will be somewhere in 2019. We'll release some more information about that. V2 was released. I said that. Support ticket system. Mm-hmm. So as you have more customers, there are more issues popping up. So in the beginning, we just had mails coming in, just info at.
And then we had
we used something from Jira Tickets. It didn't work that well. Some mails got lost, and that's also not supposed to happen. So then we switched to Freshdesk, which is our ticketing system now. So if you send a mail to us now, to contact us or info, it will all come into one spot. So that's also very helpful, not just for software, but for anyone providing a service or a product. To have like a good functioning support system so that your customers can reach you and that it gets followed up.
Okay,
even more.
Louder.
And actually we're almost finished here. The rest of 2018 was also working on new ideas.
Ooh.
And the future, which is almost there, 2019, there will be a new plugin coming. So I'm very happy to say that I think this weekend the beta will go to a select audience, and
well, like a private beta,
so it's like very limited.
And, so don't email me to sign up for the beta.
When can we do that? But very early 2019, and definitely if you're in LA, visit us at NAMM. We're going to be present there. We'll have a booth, so anyone watching, still early in LA, I think, but anyone there, please do join us.
Yeah. January 24th to 27th. In LA, well, Anaheim, California.
And well, that's it for this talk. Almost, I think.
Almost.
Demo.
Let's do a demo. Let's listen to some music. So,
volume.
Can do some.
How high do you need it?
Oh, wait till I play. Yeah. So, first gonna talk a bit about this. So, here we have CenterOne. So on the left, which is inserted on the first track that you see here. So as I said before, center prominence allows you to bring forward, and I'll play with this. So I'll play the music and I'll bring it forward and backwards so you can kind of see what it does. It's kind of like well, you'll hear the music, and then what I'll also do is I'll duck the center and use the center extraction, and then I will talk a bit more. I will use the tools, let you listen, and then I'll talk a bit more about it. So
give me one more drag of your cigarette, 'cause it's cold out here. Give me one more sigh from your jaded breath, 'cause that was the last one that we'll share together. There's no use in talking about the past. We are done
feedback.
Yeah. So now we're back in the speaker. So as you could hear, center prominence actually brings back the whole depth forward and backwards. And then on the right side you have center extraction. So the way this works is I didn't even play with center channel width, but I'll talk about it. So and I definitely suggest that you play with it yourself if you can. So the way this works is it splits the channels or the left and right signal into left, center, right, and I could change the gain of center. Obviously, when you go extreme, as in you take out the full signal, you will start hearing artifacts. So you have to, I mean, this is already a lot. So you have to be gentle with it. And then the cool thing about it is that you can use the center bandpass EQ to actually set a range. So that means now between 209 hertz and 10.4 kilohertz is what goes to the center channel. Whatever else does not belong there goes to the sides. So what the key thing is, if left, center, and right are at 0, what comes in is what comes out. So it's bit identical. It doesn't mess up anything. So whatever is not going to center, so in this case the low end, will be going to left and right. And then the last control, which is center channel width, allows you to set the width of the center. So let's say you have signals on, well, for you, the left, the center, and the right. And, let's say in normal cases, your width would be here. If I increase the center channel width, it would become bigger, like this, or more narrow, like this. So you can define how big is that center.
It's like the angle of what's in front of you between the speakers.
Yeah, exactly. And that allows you to really narrow down. If you really want the vocal without any reverb or without any echo, then you can make it more narrow. If you want to do more like a global cue, you can make it bigger. You find the balance that works for you. Any questions there? No? Yeah. Bueno.
Oh, well, then.
Yes, sir.
Working the center prominence
Yeah.
is the same actually than raising or lowering the center?
No, they're quite different.
Where's it?
So the difference is in the positioning of the elements. So I think if you, we don't have the board here.
There's a YouTube video about it, by the way. I made a blog post for more details, but what do you want to explain?
No, or do you want to give it a try?
With?
Or just explaining like where the positioning of the...
Sure. So it's two different things, center prominence and center extraction. So two different algorithms as well in the background. So what happens is, suppose you have three sources. You have, on the left you have a guitar, in the middle a voice, a piano on the right, to say something. If you are going to use center prominence, you can lower and raise your phantom center. So in this case it would be the voice or the singer in the middle. You can put it up and down, but there will not happen anything in between.
Talk a bit closer.
There's a tutorial.
No, yes, talk a bit closer, to the mic.
Shall I just run the tutorial maybe? Or can we do that?
Yeah, but then they won't hear it.
Okay, then so, I'll explain. The thing is, when I forgot to mention that guitar and piano on the left and right should be panned a little bit to the middle. So say panned halfway left and center and right. If you use the center prominence, they will stay there. They will have that same exact angular position in your panorama, regardless of how high your center prominence level goes. That is not true for center extraction. If you use the center extraction algorithm, where you first split up your stereo in left, center, right, and then rebalance your center level in this example, then by rebalancing your center level, you'll actually change the panning of those instruments, because they will lose their level balance between those channels. It's explained here also with a sine wave in this tutorial, but you can try it easily for yourself. Just pan anything, say 50% to the off center, and then use center prominence. You'll notice it will stick right in that position. If you use the center level of the LCR extraction, then you will notice that it starts moving left or center. So staying on the spot, that's the
Yeah.
difference between the two.
So yeah, if you don't want to change the panning information, then
Yep.
center prominence. I typically see this as more like a global tool of like you want to rebalance everything and bring the center more forward, but you don't want to change any of the positioning. And the left, center, and right is more like a surgical tool. Like if in in a master the vocal is not loud enough or something, you want to bring that forward, then you can really narrow only the vocal and bring that forward or backwards. So yeah, sorry.
It's a surgical tool in that use case, but there are other use cases, let's say post-production, where you get a stereo stem with your music and you want to put it on an LCR speaker system. Then you can use this as well. The plugin, we didn't mention it, but it has auxiliary outputs. So you can convert, and that's a more radical tool or usage. You can convert the stereo 2-channel stream into a 3-channel LCR stream. And then you can do separate processing of those 3 channels. You can put a compressor only on the center, something else in EQ on the sides.
So here you see that when you take a mono track or a mono aux, then you will get a plug-in input, left, right, and center, and so you can make 3 mono auxes and then put the compressor, for example, on just the center, and then just compress the center, for example, or anything else. That's
nice plug-in, man.
I
like it.
Thanks, appreciate it. Cool. And then the second plugin that we have is DyneOne. So this is the multi-band parallel compressor we talked about. So I'll play again some music and I'll pull it up. So again, because I can't talk and play at the same time, I will play the music, play with the faders, kind of see what it's doing, listen to it, and then I will go through what I did and go through some of the functions.
To remind me of why we have to say goodbye. Give me one more sad song of how it hurts. It's your last time complaining, I won't be entertaining. There's no use in talking about the past.
Cool. So all I did so far is actually I raised the fader. So we're actually at this moment in parallel compression mode. So that means the dry signal goes through. So that means that the music goes through. And whatever we blend with these faders gets added to the original signal. That's what makes it parallel. So you have a dry signal and you're adding the wet. So if I were to take this out, then the band faders would be the level of my wet signal and I wouldn't hear dry. And then there's a couple of key commands. If by holding shift and clicking on each of the bands, I can solo them, so I can listen to individual bands, see what they're doing, change the ratio or threshold, whatever I want to do. And also, by holding control, I can take the bands out of the link. So this button actually links the faders or unlinks them, so they go all together. But let's say you move them up to where you feel like it's a nice level, but you just want to have the high mid a bit louder. You can easily hit control, click, it takes them out of the link, and then it goes up and down. Yeah, how you want it. Then below here, yeah, you have the minimum attack and release. Then this panel, and then I'll talk about the auto band gain. So here we have channel linking, where you can link between, or you can have a percentage between multi-mono and stereo. So you decide how you want your compression to react. Do you want them to react on both signals together, as in just a regular downward compressor, or do you want the left channel only to react by the left channel and the right channel by the right channel? So that instead of it just being an on-off, you can actually drag a percentage between those two. So in multi-mono mode, you would have more going back and forth, which actually typically makes it a bit more wider. In stereo, you kind of have more stable stereo image. You can play with whatever percentage feels right. Then the detection circuit. you can decide also percentage-wise how it's going to react to more average signals. So whatever music you're playing, what is it doing average, or what is it doing peak? So you can have a percentage between the two. And then the weighting, and this is quite a tricky one to explain.
That was
Maybe
also
you wanna give
one that we spent a lot of time on fine-tuning and tweaking. So this behind the weighing is actually, I think, a list of about 30 parameters. What it does is all those 5 bands have a compressor. So there are 5 compressors in there. And the weighting actually is like a control, like a sidechain control for each compressor. So all the other bands, all the neighboring bands, get an influence on that single compressor of each band. And this weighting, this controls how much you're going to let neighboring bands influence that one band or not. So single band on the left means that every compressor is working on its own, and all band means that they all have the full band, the full width, full spectrum of sidechain input.
But do I understand they are the sidechain key of each other? The bands?
Well, that's kind of a
Yeah.
in a compressor. It's kind of this, like, your sidechain is your signal, so that means it's kind of the same as.
But when you change like the LF below, then it affects the other ones, and that will affect the LF also. And
no, so let's say you have a low frequency band. If this is a 50%, the compression that happens on that band is decided on the signal of the low frequency band, but also a bit of the low mid frequency band and a bit of the mid frequency band. That signal combined is what triggers how much compression is going to do. No. No. That's the filters.
The phase is purely the choice of crossover filters.
Yeah. And then we have another section on the right, which is called the settings section. And there we have 2 versions. The ultra quality, which is the highest quality filters we developed, and it's the same as version 1. So this is how we first released it, but then we had a lot of people who said, we love the plugin, but we want to use it on low latency mode or in post-production or in multiple situations where it was too heavy, because it's quite a heavy plugin. So ideal for mastering and even mixing. Definitely mixing. So we decided to come up with new filters that are low latency, so they only have about 1.3, 1.4 milliseconds of latency, but are also way less CPU heavy. So if you're using it on individual instruments, you could use low latency mode. If you're really going for the extreme quality, such as on a mix bus or a mastering, then you can use ultra quality, and that way you can have both, and that's nice. Then the last feature, I am going to talk about. Oh, okay, great.
There's more.
So is the band auto gain, and this is a bit of a tricky, because I know there's some confusion about it. Band auto gain doesn't mean that the compression has a makeup gain or has an automatic makeup, to where you all know automatic makeup gain in the compressor is where the output gets compensated based on the amount of compression. But what we did in the first version is we were looking for something intuitive. So what we wanted is that if you drag the threshold down completely very low, and you let's say you have a high ratio, that you're gonna run out of space, because again this fader can go from -infinity to +12. But if you have a threshold of -60 with high compression, your level actually goes very low, that you can barely hear it anymore. So what we wanted to do is we figured out a way to compensate that, so that we actually raise the level, but it's a constant level. It's just a fixed gain offset that brings it more into the range to where you can hear it. So
for all bands.
For all bands.
All bands.
Yeah, correct.
So it's depending on which threshold and ratio each band has. So the auto gain, or that offset gain, is purely determined by the threshold and the ratio setting.
Yeah.
So we calculate how much that theoretically lowered the signal, and then we make an offset.
But is the gain individual on the different bands, or
Yeah.
is it a global?
No. Sorry.
No. It's actually the 5 faders for the bands. It's like an offset for that fader.
For the fader.
But only for that band.
Yes.
but so for example, if I were to change on only one band the ratio from 20:1 to 10:1, the level wouldn't drop by half the gain reduction. So I mean, the other way to compensate it would be to change the fader level, but that's what. Sorry.
The fader range.
The range, yes. So it's kind of like an extra offset on each fader, to where you can still balance it. Yeah, that's. I don't know if that makes sense.
So in a sense, you screw it up. You screw it up big time. I mean, if you auto gain a certain frequency range, and you're not really aware of that at that moment, and you don't know how much it is. Is that right? And if I understand it right?
Kind of, but you have the faders to play with. So the premise or the starting point we had for this plugin is that you would use the 5 faders by ear, by the way, to set a range still by ear, old-fashioned. But I kind of get your point. We had, I think, a complaint, I could call it, that indeed there was a jump in level if you would have all the faders, I believe, I have to see back, at 0 dB, and you have different threshold ratio settings, extreme, so minus 60 threshold and so on. Then there would be a difference if you would start measuring with a sine wave. So there would, let's say, the output, the result would be not as expected, would not be the same level of as what you would calculate it to be, because that auto gain was hidden. That's why in the V2 we decided to make this button here. So if you don't want to have anything being offset, which is done in the first place just as user convenience, but if you don't want it, you can switch it off.
But is the applied auto gain then gradually? So it means if you're at threshold minus 50, it's 1 dB, and at minus 55, it's 1.5 or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's a simple formula actually. That so ratio times something with threshold equals offset applied to the band fader.
Okay, but it's nowhere you can look at it and you don't get a notice of that.
Of how much it is.
No.
So, but and that's the reason why we gave the option, because if you really say like I want to have it mathematically corrected, if I have an input signal of minus 30, I have a threshold of minus 40, and a 2-to-1 ratio, then I know that I'm gonna get out minus 35.
Yeah. So if you would have your faders at 0, and like Robin says, certain settings, you could mathematically calculate what the compression should be for a sine wave input signal, for example. That just for convenience, we had that offset because we felt like it made more sense that all the faders stayed in the same range, regardless of the settings of release and of threshold and ratio. Yeah. But again, we added this because this is a fair point. Sometimes you don't want this to be going on. You just want it to be scientifically all the way through, and
it's always a problem if you don't know what's happening.
I understand.
Change it from, let's say, minus 50 to minus 55 threshold, and you suddenly feel that it's not compressing more because the gain went up.
Yeah.
You're like, why is that?
Yeah, understand.
So, but it's on a band.
Yes, correct.
Would it be possible, Robin, you spoke about you gave an example of all the bands at the same time lowering.
Yeah.
You spoke about upping one band.
Yeah.
Can we hear that? Is that possible?
Yeah. So let's say everything is here.
I maybe show the subgrouping as a.
Yeah. So that.
As well.
Oh.
Yeah.
We are done, and I don't want to look back. Give me one more kiss from your bitter lips to remind me of why we have to say goodbye. Give me one more sad song of how it hurts. It's your last time complaining, I won't be entertaining.
So what I just did, I just went back to a default preset just because everything was messed up. But yeah, what I did is I took out first the higher bands out of the group, and then I could individually move them up. So as I did first the high mid group, then the high frequency group, and then the low frequency group. And then you can rebalance, retonalize the music. And I did it way too extreme, of course, but it just to
By
give
the
an
way,
example.
we also have now the opposite. You can have subgroups, so you can remove bands, remove faders from the full group, and then have 2 or 3 faders grouped as a subgroup.
So now only those 2 faders are going, because the other 3 are out of the subgroup. So you can just now have these. So yeah, it works both ways.
That's all with control. We use the modifier keys. We didn't want to overpopulate the GUI, the user interface, because it would become too crowded with all kinds of option buttons. So yeah, just try out all the modifier keys, Control Alt Command till all do something. The manual explains it, but just try it. You'll see what it does.
Yeah. So Shift actually solos the band, so you can listen to the individual band and listening to the compression on it, and then Control allows you to subgroup certain faders and just make it more easy to change. Yeah, I'll go back to the last part, which what was that? More questions. Okay. Go.
The first one is from Sigurdur, one of our heavy users.
Yeah.
He had this master recently where he wanted to make the background vocals be wider, so further from the center, and a bit lower in volume.
Yeah.
He did experiment, but couldn't figure it out. What settings would you try?
So say it again. The backing vocals he wanted to wider.
He wanted to have sort of a bit wider.
Yeah.
And lower.
And lower. Well, I guess in my personal opinion, I would do have them as plug-in outputs. So assuming that he has a DAW that supports the plug-in outputs, I would suggest using the plug-in outputs, and then probably making a stereo track of left and right and having a mono track on center, and then just play with the level of left and right, but also maybe even use a stereo widener if that works. If you really want it louder, use a stereo widener on the left and right channel. So that's that's
a good idea.
To do.
Another question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I totally understand it, but just ask it the way you.
Can you be louder as well, so you don't have to repeat?
Yeah.
Louder.
Are there any issues if you use CenterOne to separate 2 tracks?
Yeah.
Basically copying the same song.
Yeah.
By muting the left and right on the first and the middle on the second track to use different compression.
Yes, that would do exactly the same thing as taking the plug-in outputs. So if you have a DAW, because there. So some plug-in outputs some DAWs don't support these plug-in outputs. So another way to do it would be to duplicate the track, put CenterOne on the first track, on the second track. On the first track, let's say mute the center, so you have just left, right, and on the other track, do it the other way around. And then if you combine them both in a bus, you would have exactly the same as what you started with. So then you can.
The question of the guys: are there any issues if you use CenterOne on 2 separate tracks?
No.
So there are no issues. It's actually
simply said, there are no issues because it sums 100% and it's exactly the same as what you started with.
I guess this is his answer.
That's it. So no.
No issues, guys.
No issues.
Okay, I try.
Louder.
Bueno.
Cool.
Another one? No. Oh, perfect. Actually, the last one is just I showed you the both demos, is some quotes, and that's something we're very proud of. So as we actually said, like one of the key things that you have to do is obviously reach out with your plugin to people who want to play with it and give you feedback. My dear mentor, Bob Katz.
They are both biased.
Huh? They're biased.
But you're also a user of the plugin. You're unbiased, so you're honest. You're honest.
But honestly, Bob, if he wouldn't like it, he would never say anything that he doesn't like. So, I could assume that, but Bob is too has too much integrity to support something he wouldn't support. That's a big.
Bob.
That's Bob's thing after he used it, because we sent it to him, and then like a couple of days later he sent this. I'm not gonna read it, but it's good. No, it was.
So
And then we have some more just to wrap it up. So, Joe Ciccarelli in LA. We have Juan de Dios, our dear friend as well. We've Seth Drake. We have Greg Wells as well, another great producer engineer. And also Bob Ludwig was, amazing, one of the top mastering engineers in the world. He's very. So I was very very happy to get his email and say, like, well, actually he just wrote this in the email, so that was very nice to get. And it's just nice to get this feedback from people. And that's.
I have one question.
Yes, there are questions.
What is the most requested feature on the 2 plugins that will be implemented in the next version?
No, we can't talk about it. We can't talk about that yet. No. But
maybe just in general to reply to that, we do get a lot of questions like, can you change this, can you add that, and so on. We have a whole list. We keep track of it, so it's not like we just throw your mails away or so. So please do. I mean, it's all appreciated to get the feedback, but we can't make it happen overnight. So we'll have to prioritize, see what works. Some things are just technically not possible. Then we'll also give that as we'll reply that.
Yeah.
But some things do work. Actually, it's funny. A lot of feedback are things that we already said ourselves, like we should change that. We should try this. But we have to plan it over the coming months and so on.
Okay.
Because it's just too much to do all in one. Plus, it's sometimes more work under the hood than it would be. Just adding a button is sometimes more.
And the
more
version increment for 1 to 2 is like a major version. But
Yeah.
do you also have like these minor version
Yes.
increments?
Yeah, actually, the way we do versions is every even version. So we have now version 2.4 for both, I think. Yeah. And then we do 2.5 for internal testing. Like if we have a new feature and we want somebody to test, we use 2.5, blah, blah, blah. And then when we're ready, we go to 2.6. So it's always even goes out, uneven or odd stays. So with every major version, it's bug fixes, but it's also typically like a new feature here and there. So
Cool.
we definitely try to do that with every minor release, or however you call it, that there's still also new features.
So things that are possible are in these maintenance releases. The bigger features, we have to plan that in. We'll see next.
Exactly.
How about, are you thinking about changing the fact that you can change the frequencies on which the multibands work?
That's definitely one of the big
That's
requests.
A big feature. Yeah.
Now it's because it's 160 and then blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. That's a very tough one, but it's definitely one of the most requested things. So it's definitely something we've been breaking our heads over for a long time, and will continue to do so. So.
But why is it so tough?
Because of the tune, the fact that the current filters are really tuned to be phase coherent, so to be able to do that programmatically is quite tricky, because they all interfere with each other. And if you have one frequency that's too close to the next, then you have to do different things to compensate. So there's a lot of compensation going on that, in this case, we spend months making sure that these tuned filters sounded the best we could. So doing this on the fly kind of adds another level of a lot of complexity.
And the upsampling is 192?
Yes. That's correct.
Did you have trouble with this?
With what?
The up and down
Upsampling.
sampling? I mean, not technically,
Uh-huh.
but I was beta testing a plugin, and they said, well, if the plugin doesn't do anything, it's practically a bit identical. Which, well, I thought I heard it every time they switched it on, and we did a blind test.
Yeah.
And they put the finger on the upsampling, which had a little something in it. I don't know.
It's the filtering. So for up and down sampling, you'll need anti-aliasing filters, and typically those are FIR filters, and they have pre and post ringing. So that's probably what you heard. In our case, we incorporated that anti-aliasing into the crossover filters. So that's also why we have that high latency. We do take a higher latency and a lot of CPU exactly to calculate filters that have very minimal pre and post ringing. So the good sound that we have in DyneOne, it does come at a cost. So that's why this high CPU is there. But we also had that issue, but we fixed it by just upping the quality of the filtering.
That's a couple of years ago.
Yeah. It's definitely a lot easier. Yeah. But we definitely experimented with not upsampling and upsampling, and I mean, it was quite a big difference in the compression itself.
Precision,
so yeah, we definitely said like we need to upsample. Yeah, because otherwise, also, I mean, you only want to do it when there's significant more quality.
Oh, sure.
So you always have to balance.
I would love to have only 5% Reaper CPU, but it's not.
No.
At least not when I use it.
You have it on Reaper?
I use Reaper.
Oh,
well,
okay.
on I think I have an i7 6-core, so this is bigger.
I have an i7, but it's a 5-6-year-old machine, and as you know, I mostly use 2 of your DyneOnes.
Yeah.
I make the S6000s a bit. I use it in MS mode. So you have to use 2 instances.
Yeah.
And well, the processing goes up to about 50%.
Yeah.
I guess that. Yeah. So the rendering is 1.2.
Right. Yeah.
Something like that.
For real time.
Yeah.
That's I think like especially clock speed we that has a big impact more than the cores, right?
The gigahertz, that's actually what makes it, because it's all the calculations. The more calculations can be done, the quicker it's.
Well, I'm moving more into plugins now.
Okay.
So,
but it is actually one of the most common topics in feedback we have from DyneOne. It is a high CPU load. We tried to counter that a bit with the low latency setting as well. There we reduced the upsampling and some other features, so it has a lower CPU load as well. But yeah, it's like a compromise. To get that good sound, it has to come from somewhere, and we are looking into ways to optimize, but we can only go that far.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we also, I think when we started the idea, we also had the hope that we are now in a time that hardware and CPUs are at a point that you can run this type of algorithms on a modern day CPU, and it will only become better. At least that's our hope. Moore's law is coming to its end, but we figured it would be viable to have this algorithm running on a modern CPU.
Because also optimization, you also come to a limit, because we started optimize. I mean, we spent almost a year on optimizing, because a lot of the time went spent on optimizing, and in the first few months you optimize 10%, 20%, and you get super excited. But by the time it goes lower, you're like 0.5%, yes, and then at some point it just becomes so minimal. That's.
So Apple crossed your plans by that. They're not putting out any higher CPU.
That's true.
At the moment. Huh?
That's true. Still waiting.
Something about the filtering. Let's say most of the design works has great filtering, you could say.
Definitely.
Because we've been speaking a lot about all the beautiful functions, but the filtering is actually what makes it sound better.
Mm-hmm.
How did you work on that? How did you improve that? Because we didn't speak about it.
I mean, that's a lot of like internal R&D. I think there was a lot of testing and.
I think we can talk about, for example, the slopes.
Mm-hmm.
We tested a lot of different slope settings for all the filters. We settled now for 12 dB per octave, which is quite mild. We went for even sharper, and we felt it just didn't feel right. So that's especially you did a lot of listening tests on that, and we did make some choices and a lot of listening tests to find like what would work the best. Even though whatever slope we would have chosen, it would always have been mathematically correct. That wouldn't, like 24 dB or more, that would also be mathematically fine. There would be no ripple and so on, but it would not sound right in combination with the compression and so on. So that's where you just go by hearing and
I mean, a lot of this, not just the filtering, but also any algorithm. I mean, that's why we say there's so many iterations of like sending something, listening is like, and listening to a lot of different music, because on some stuff it works, some so high transient, very compressed, and then just giving feedback constantly. And I mean, at some point it becomes very tricky, because you've listened to the same song with different settings for 100 different settings, and you start going crazy.
What is it
but
that makes a great range of change still sound very natural? What does it seem that programming?
I think the filter, well, the quality of the filter, the fact that we didn't want to compromise, because compromising would mean less CPU, and that would compromise the quality. So we had to find a balance to where we were happy with the quality, but the CPU, it was still to where we thought we could get it down enough to, I mean, but it's always back and forth.
Yep.
So,
cool. More questions online? Yeah.
Are there any recommendations for books and other resources for people who want to develop plugins?
Oh, good question. And I have a terrible memory, so I cannot. I have a few books, but I'm bad with titles. I can put it in the comments. Yeah.
I'll look it up.
I'll look it up again.
So the biggest takeaway when you start building software.
Say it louder so that everybody can.
The biggest takeaways.
Yes.
Get a build server. Use Juice.
Yeah.
Make compatible for different systems. Use Kanban.
Yeah.
Or
more
a
people.
method to collaborate. You work with Jira.
Yep.
Yep.
What was the plugin? You use MATLAB.
MATLAB.
To develop, to do the R&D.
To do some R&D.
Yeah.
Some R&D.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Do some R&D, yes.
Yeah, divided in small pieces.
Yes.
Yeah.
Take a big idea that you haven't and divide it in very small pieces and tackle one by one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And have fun with it.
And have fun.
Yeah.
That's also important.
Yeah.
Yes.
How many engineers have been involved?
Well, engineers for
For coders.
yeah. Indeed.
Yeah. That's
And because I always think with everyone else involved, I think in total it's about 10 people now.
about 10 people.
10 people. But most of them part-time freelancing. So I actually, since this year, I am full-time working for Leapwing, but before that also part-time. So that's also the nice thing that we can be flexible with everyone sharing a little bit of their time and so.
How long did it take since you released until you get the first buyer?
that was pretty quickly.
Yeah,
like a week or so.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty quick, or less even. Like
because I think we did announcements, like we had the marketing going on already, some teasers and the beta testers as well. So that one.
But still, in the beginning was very slow.
Yeah, it ramps up very slow.
Yeah.
How do you determine your price of?
Damn, that's too good of a question.
Yeah.
We thought about it before. It's like, fuck, somebody's gonna ask that.
I'm gonna avoid that question.
But it's
No.
Because it's an amount
It's a good
of
one.
work. There's an amount of creative idea that you have. There's so many. Who's your target group or who?
Yeah.
What the competitors do?
Yeah.
I think that for us
the
was
main point,
the main one is like looking at competitors and looking at other products and figuring out,
if you would take like a normal model, like you would calculate the cost, the hours that you put in, and so on, that you don't know how much you will sell. So you don't know what that amount has to be times how many, which you don't know. It's all unknowns. So we looked at competitors where everyone else in the market is kind of. So we wanted to make a fair price for what it is. So I think at $199 we are now. So but it was a difficult question. We went a lot of back and forth on that one, and then we settled for this.
199 per once.
Yeah,
once.
And when there is a new release, it's another price.
V2 was free release. So V1 was $199. If you own that, you automatically got version 2 as well.
Yeah, we can't promise to keep doing that forever.
No, but
I mean, it kind of depends what the future.
With the third one.
Not decided.
That will be Black Friday.
Next year, Black Friday. It's also a good question. I mean, but we haven't decided, so I don't know.
There's no, because we looked for are there guidelines in how do you put software pricing. There are some general things for commercial software, well, not commercial, but B2B software and service as software or software as a service. But for plugins, I can't give like one guideline, like here's the formula to calculate your plugin price. It doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Good.
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 Bueno.